Hi, I'm taking a break from making the next lore video, and I thought I'd make this one in the meantime. There's something I've been thinking about. I can't stop thinking about it. There are a few eviction crises, both brewing and ongoing all over the world, and a few refugee crises as well. And it made me think about Final Fantasy XIV. It's the online RPG one, and they have these starting cities. One of them is called Ul'dah. It's a desert city. It's in the middle of the desert. And it just so happens that Ul'dah also has a quote-unquote problem with homelessness. They have refugees from the great calamity that happened a few years ago. And when you're there, you don't have to go out of your way to see that. It's in your face. They're not shy about it. I really like that game. I would still be playing it if I could keep up with the steep time investment that is required. But when it comes to this point, I personally have a problem with it. As far as I'm aware, as far as I have played it, the government there, they don't ever deal with this problem. They don't ever solve their homelessness problem. And they have a sultana, they have resource extracting corporations that hold effective monopolies, and they can impose political gridlocks. They have what basically amounts to slave labor. So yeah, they have the capital to deal with the problem, but they don't. And that's to be expected. Our own governments don't see fit to deal with that problem appropriately. It's reasonable that our fictional interpretations of what a government looks like would do the same. But it kind of becomes a problem for me when the game doesn't allow me, the player, to engage with that problem the way that I would like to. And of course, many other games have homeless characters, sometimes more in the background than others, and they usually, I don't remember any single one of them letting me address that problem the way that I would like to, but it's more or less reasonable depending on the game, right? Like, depends on the story. If there's an alien invasion going on, you kind of have to deal with the aliens first. And it also depends on how much agency the game allows the player. The affordance of interactions within the range of mechanics of the game. If the player character is very constricted from acting within the narrative, then sure, it's more acceptable. But Final Fantasy XIV doesn't do that. It's an MMO, it's an online RPG, it's an open world. You have a lot of freedom to do whatever the you want. And it gets compounded by two factors. First, the game actually has mechanics that would allow me to deal with that problem. They just won't let me. The game has a housing market. Ul'dah itself, that desert city, it has this housing district that is reserved for adventurers such as ourselves. And in the course of our questing, we hoard enough wealth to buy a mansion for ourselves if you want to, but maybe they shouldn't be giving all that land for us. Maybe they should be dealing with their homelessness problem. And if they're giving it to us, then maybe they should let me bring those people to live in my mansion, right? And thematically, this operates in a couple of levels. First, there's the kinda high concept idea of what does it mean to be a hero. And yes, I get combat is the most engaging way to let the player interact with your game, with your story, but games don't have to be limited to combat, and this game in particular isn't. It has a trove of other mechanics through which we can interact with the game, mechanics through which my character defines what does it mean to be a hero. My character is objectively a hero in this story, but in the context of this story, to be a hero is to be the good guy with a gun. Sure, you can run some odd errands here and there for people you meet along the way, but you're never encouraged or allowed to deal with systematic problems such as this one. And the game doesn't acknowledge that you are a hero despite of it. And the other level is, well, drawing comparisons to the real world. This would be a community problem, even more so than a political or financial one. Our sense of community, of what community means and who's included in it, would define what we could personally do about it and what we could push our representatives to do about it within the realm of politics. So it becomes a bit poignant in the context of an MMORPG because this is an online game. It's community based by its very nature, and Final Fantasy itself is largely considered to be a very community-friendly, community-centered game within that group. So, when it comes down to it, this game is telling you that being a good guy is punching bad guys, and that community doesn't exactly include everyone that is physically present in your community. Even though it does have the tools to let you deal with that kind of stuff in a different way, and even though it does present those problems to you. So, okay. The video game thing is a comparison that I honestly thought about, but the important part about this discussion, of course, bleeds out into the real world. It comes from the real world, right? The video game stuff is just dressing, it's just context to make it more palatable, more easier to understand. And like I said, we have a few eviction crises probably coming, refugee crisis all over the place. Some of it is driven by the pandemic, some of it by climate change, some of it by wars. But regardless, a lot of people are right now or in the verge of becoming completely destitute. The quote-unquote lowest social class of homeless people could explode its population in the very near future. And we know we can't count on our governments to help with that once we're in that group. And we know once the lowest class just above that gets swallowed whole by it, the next lowest class is in line for that fate as well, which is something we can derive from the climate change and from the massive wealth redistribution we've seen happening right in front of our eyes during this pandemic. And that is still ongoing, and that is a part of this eviction crisis as well. People go homeless, businesses go broke, big banks and big corporations sweep in and buy all the real estate. Amazon has been buying a lot of it. Suddenly a lot of nearly destitute families that had desperately grasping to that narrow advantage of generational wealth lose that advantage. And it's not just about the eviction stuff. the redistribution happens through many aspects. Some of it isn't, strictly speaking, financial, but it bears those consequences down the line. Like, there's a number of children falling even further behind their studies because they can't afford proper online teaching. A lot of people just lost their jobs. Once the economy starts bouncing back up, they'll be scrambling to find any kind of job, regardless of wages or working conditions. Smaller businesses get replaced by bigger corporations. And yes, the homeless stuff. All these people just lose a lot of their leverage in the process, their political and financial agency. So yeah, it is not in the best interest of big money to deal with this problem, and it is therefore also not, broadly speaking, in the best interest of our governments to do that either. We can't count on them. And things are gonna get worse, like there will always be ups and downs, but generally speaking, things are just gonna get worse from here on out. Because of climate change, man. You should either be able to see that by now, or you're a climate change denialist. In which case, man, the world's on fire. We are not meme hounds. This isn't fine. And that's where the community aspect comes into play. A lot of the stuff I've been talking about lately has to do with either empathy or our ability to perceive and protect ourselves from whatever messages might be floating in the background, dispersed within the ever-present zeitgeist. And when it comes to community, the message is usually, yeah, not everybody's a part of your community. Not everybody is entitled to your help. And helping your community maybe isn't really what a good guy's help would look like. We tend to brush these people aside, under the rug, wherever we can. Back in Brazil, I remember we had gabirus, the garbage people. I don't know if they're still around, probably, but these are basically people living in landfills. They live in the trash and off the trash. They exist physically within our community, but in practice, they don't really exist outside that narrow space they occupy. They are effectively invisible to us. So we don't have to worry about them. Maybe you hear about them, you probably forget about them, nothing will be done. I think it was LA, it just passed a law that basically criminalizes existence as a homeless person. Do you guys realize the long-term implications of that? It means testing for existence. You can't live here. Suddenly having a job, any job, is a matter of life and death as it never has been before. And yes, sorry, I sound like that in the end is nigh stereotype guy you see in movies, but the situation is dire. We like to pretend that it isn't, myself included, for the sake of my mental health. So, okay. Why do I talk about this shit? Because the way I see it, we have two courses that we need to take concurrently. One of them requires change, massive systemic change, that won't happen overnight, maybe won't happen fast enough, if at all, and would require massive, just f***ing massive popular support, because we're trying to change the way things are. We're trying to change the status quo, but the status quo has the upper hand. It's social inertia. It's a lot easier for them to just keep things going the way they are than it is for us to change it. So in order to get that kind of popular support, we need the help of the other side as well. All those people that currently don't really care for your rights, or that may have a slightly skewed perspective of reality, such as vaccines will kill you or magnetize your body or implant chips in your bloodstream, while there's a pandemic raging across all over the world and killing millions of people. We kinda need them. We need to find a way to talk to these people. And facts won't help. Reason will not prevail. These are not people that are currently set in a reasonable course, but we need to find a way to reach them. So yeah, change is unlikely. The other course is community. We need to be able to help ourselves. Not just ourselves individually, but everyone around us. We need to be able to help each other. So we need to expand our perception of what community means, what it entails, who it entails, and what we can and should do to help it. But the larger cultural messaging is against that. We're going against the grain. The ruling classes of any given status quo mostly maintain their grasp on power by keeping the lower classes, the ones that are oppressed by it, from banding together and helping each other and presenting a unified front that could counter their largely illusory power. They only have as much power as we give them, but we just keep on giving. So, yeah, this is what's been on my mind lately. And don't feel bad if you can't do much about it right now. Most of us lack individual agency to change the world around us in any meaningful way. But that's why we need to start talking about this shit. This is why we need to start working towards collective empowerment and building a collective safety net that can carry us through this shit over the next few decades. And it really starts with just talking about it amongst ourselves and the people around us. So yeah, Final Fantasy is great, 10 out of 10, you should play it. And don't worry, the next LARP video is coming, it's gonna be great. At least I think. Self-plug, yay, go. Please do stay safe and see you around.